2, 1. Okay, so today we're actually going to go into section 1.2. Now 1.2 is called recognizing arguments, right? So we go from 1.1 to giving you what the characteristics of arguments are to actually recognizing arguments from non-arguments, right? So recognizing arguments. Now, right as section 1.2 opens up, we actually get two criteria. These two criteria on that page are exactly what we learned in terms of the compositional definition of what an argument is, right? So, number one, at least one statement, right? So at least one statement, right? At least one statement must claim, right, to present evidence / reasons, right? And then two, there must be, and I'm trying to get the wording of the book correctly, there must be a claim, right? That claim that the alleged evidence, that the alleged evidence, right? The evidence from number one supports or implies something. That something is obviously going to be the conclusion, right? So here you have a premise, here you have a conclusion. Or these are just the formal elements of an argument with some restated language, right? Now remember, between 1 and 2, I always draw like premise / premises, right, with an arrow going down to the conclusion, right? The conclusion is the implied something, right? What the statement that's supported by the evidence listed inside the premises. And the premises are statements that support the conclusion. Notice these two elements must be present in a particular passage, right? And I believe, sir, now the word claim here, right? A claim is a conclusion, right? So claim and conclusion mean the same thing. A claim without any evidence, we might call an assertion, right? And assertions really aren't worthwhile to us. And notice entire disciplines of knowledge inside your major and your upper division courses, they're not just making assertions, right? Because they're after truthful knowledge about a specific domain of inquiry. So for instance, the domain of living things that biology studies is not interested in asserting facts about vertebrates versus invertebrates, right? There are specific characteristics that obtain truthfully between any statement a person makes and having an invertebrate structure or having a vertebrate structure, right? So any claim that's truth apt should be adopted based on the fact that you have evidence or reasons to think it being true. We're just restating the stuff from section 1.1. But here, what's going to happen in this chapter is we're going to learn an entire taxonomy, right? A way of classifying arguments from non-arguments. And so we will study a specific list of things that do not have properties 1 or 2 in them. Okay, so let me do that thing where I share my screen and we take a look at some of these classifications together, right? Now, but before I do that, our book uses a very particularly strange phrase to mean on non-argument. So non-argument, right? Non-argument is equal to what our book calls non-inferential passages. They're the same thing. Now, over the years of teaching English, I've used many different textbooks. Some of them call them non-argument, some of them in this chapter call them non-inferential passages. We're going to talk about this phrase inferential. And as I said in the previous 1.1 lecture, this arrow that we're drawing a conclusion from evidence, that entire process of reasoning, which includes starting here and ending your destination with the conclusion, all of that is what we call inference, right? Inference is the process of drawing a conclusion from a set of premises. So there's an old joke from when I was growing up and earlier than that, here's a riddle. A man is found dead in a pool of blood, and around him are 52 bicycles. Why was the man murdered? I'll pause in case you want to give that riddle a chance, and you can even pause the video. But as young people, you may or may not know that Bicycle is a brand of poker card, right? So Bicycle, if you go to the drugstore, you might buy a deck of cards. And the idea was that someone was murdered over gambling, right? But if you were aware of what the 52 bicycles referred to, right, you would draw the inference that it was most likely over betting, gambling, or poker game got bad, someone didn't want to pay, or someone won, or someone cheated, something like that. But those inferences are possible in the riddle if you have a certain set of information, right? Now, of course, it's a riddle because it equivocates. It uses one definition of bicycle where your mind might have went to like the literal definition of bicycle. You didn't recognize it was a name brand of playing cards, right? But the inference of that riddle has people who have the premise, they knew what the 52 bicycle card referred to, could make a more likely inference about why someone was murdered than if they didn't have that information at all, right? So now, I also want to state that in between the list of simple non-inferential passages that we're about to go over in lecture, you'll also see these little blurbs, right? So if you bought the real simple textbook or you're renting it, right? It's like the 3-ring hole punch. It's like a binder textbook. It's the cheapest way to purchase it, right? But there are these little blurbs right here. This one says Aristotle. You don't actually need to know, for my class, you don't need to know the history of logic. And I'm not going to teach you a historical conception of logic. That would be more in line with like if this logic course was in a course sequence, history and philosophy of science, right? Then we would study a little bit about the history of logic and its relationship to the development of mathematics, for instance. All right, there's a really great graphic novel, actually, that goes over the history of mathematics, illustrated, and then it, has pictures of logic as a subset of mathematical history. So that's a really cool graphic novel. Forget the name of it, but I'll actually remind me. If someone's interested, send me a message. I can get that to you. But you'll notice here, you don't need to know. They have these little sections. They're called eminent logicians. You don't need to know that. Okay? So I'm not requiring you to know the history of logic. This course is basically what we can do with the lecture content and the actionable skill that lecture supports with the exercises, the green exercises, right? I think in this printing, they might be blue. Okay, so the first of these, right, and I have this, but I'm also going to reference the screen. So let me switch my screen right now, right? Pause, get a drink, get a latte. You're taking this class online. I think logic should be done with a nice latte, right? Not saying that, I almost exclusively go to Highland Coffee. It's where I work in town, do a lot of my writing there. All right, I'm sharing, sorry. All right, so here's the recognizing argument section, right? And here are those two, right? And you'll see the word claim, right, as defined here. A claim is that something follows from alleged evidence or reasons. A claim, a statement that follows evidence or reasons is also called the conclusion, right? Now, there is something here called an explicit claim is usually asserted by a premise or conclusion indicator words. So explicit claims are just that. The indicator words are present, right? An implicit claim is a piece of reasoning without the conclusion indicator words. Really all it really means, right? So here's the simple non-inferential passages. Let's go over them. Now, simple non-inferential passages do not possess properties 1 or 2 in the recognizing arguments, right? So they're something else. They're a conception or use of language that does not either have premises or conclusions, and they definitely don't have an inferential link between the premises and conclusions, right? Somehow, and notice, not all uses of language include thinking and reasoning in terms of formal argumentative structure, right? So here, now, a simple note about the non-inferential passages. If you were to put premises in line with some of these, you would develop arguments. So these simple non-inferential or non-argumentative passages are devoid of properties 1 and 2 that we began the lecture with, right? So a warning is a form of expression that's intended to put someone on guard against a dangerous or detrimental situation, right? Now, usually in the in-person class, I will do my impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger from Kindergarten Cop, right? And Arnold Schwarzenegger in every 80s and 90s action movie goes, "Get down! Come with me if you want to live," right? So when he says in Terminator 2, "Come with me if you want to live," right? He's not giving an argument. He's like, "I'm a T2. I am the, I'm the robotic Terminator, and I'm here to protect you against something more dangerous." So you have to imply all of that as an argument as to why Sarah Connor should rise up from the floor, right? If you haven't seen T2, you should. James Cameron was a wonderful action director for really cheesy action sci-fi movies. But in our books example, watch out that you don't slip on the ice. Notice, it's just a statement offered on hand. You're warning someone about something. You're not actually, and when you warn someone of immediate danger, you don't sit there and go, "Let me supply you a bunch of premises as to why you should heed my warning." I mean, you could turn a warning into an argument, but as an act of speech, if you said, "Get down, move out of the way," they're short, you're communicating, and there's something, right? Whatever you do, don't confide your personal secrets to blabbermouth Bob, right? Now, I'm not trying to prove that Bob is a blabbermouth. I'm just offering it on hand, right? So warnings, expressions, simple statements, right? Next, someone can give you pieces of unsolicited advice. These are a form of expression that make recommendation about a future decision or course of conduct underway. So consider, how many times have you seen new mothers, right, receive advice from strangers about being a mother, like they have some wisdom, and sometimes it's warranted, maybe it is, right? That's an argument to be made. But most often, a new mother knows her baby more than any other people. So if she knows that, some strategy of teething is just not working, while other people just come up and give pieces of advice, they might, in a piece of advice, you might not even give the reasoning for why you're giving that advice, right? So again, that's a non-argument, non-inferential passage right there, right? So before accepting a job after class hours, I would suggest you give careful consideration to your course load, right? Okay. A statement of belief or opinion, right? A statement of belief is just that. This is what we believe. You don't give reasons for it, right? So if you've ever been to a Catholic mass, right, there's little cards in the church pews, or if you've gone to a mainline Protestant church before, you might pull up, right, But like you get the church bulletin that gives the order of the things that are going or what you're saying, or like, this is what we believe, the Nicene Creed. Like Christians at their church services do not give long drawn out stated reasoned defenses for their belief because they're in their own space. Why would they defend what they believe with evidence, right? In the space during worship. It simply says what the Nicene Creed says, right? And it's there for you to reference during the Catholic Mass because you recite the Nicene Creed, right? Or you recite the Lord's Prayer. It's there for reference, right? So a statement of belief or opinion, right? Some nonprofits will list their statements of belief about their mission statement. It's just what they believe. And people state their beliefs without evidence all the time. And in doing so, again, a statement of belief or opinion is just that. It's belief or opinion or assertion without any reasons. We don't know why we should accept a statement of belief or opinion as true, right? Let me scroll down. Loosely associated statements are probably the weirdest grouping here, just to be honest. This example is from like the Tao Te Ching, and they might be about a general subject, but they lack any unity themselves. They're just loosely associated statements of sacred scripture, for instance, from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu here, right? I won't go over the example because, I mean, don't get me wrong, this grouping is also in the homework when you have to identify it, but it's not the one that we're going to come across the most. Reports, right? A report consists of a group of statements that just convey what happened, right? So if we go open up a periodical, right? Or we read a book report. Book reports are really boring to write. Like, so consider when you were in school in 4th grade and you wrote a book report about some particular book, like Where the Wild Things Are, you simply say, there is this character, he wakes up in the middle of the night in his monster outfit and sees a bunch of monsters that he befriends, right? I mean, reports are really boring. There's no premises supplying a conclusion here, it's just conveying information, right? Or think about, there is this boy who didn't die with Voldemort, and Voldemort like got zapped by his own magic because he was so loved by his mother who gave her life. And then this boy named Harry Potter grew up under the stairs. Like, can you imagine like listening to a summary of just what happened, right? Again, when you learn to write book reports in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, these things do not convey. They're just looking for you to practice summarizing information, right? Not make arguments with those summaries. And like a newspaper clipping, you could just take a look at the newspaper clipping. Witnesses said they heard a loud crack before a balcony gave way at a popular night spot, dropping dozens of screaming people 14 feet. At least 80 people were injured at the Diamond Horse Show Casino when they fell onto broken glass and splintered wood. Investigators are waiting for an engineer's report on the deck's occupancy load. That's it. There's no argument there. It's just information, right? But that's something we encounter quite a bit. Now, expository passages, right? An expository passage is kind of like, you can think of exposition as just conveying information in a particular discourse. It mostly resembles encyclopedias, right? Like, there was this guy, William James is the American philosopher and father of American psychology, was a professor at Harvard from 1869 until his death in 1910. Like, that literally is exposition. It's a biographical account of my favorite philosopher's life. Again, right? And you'll see that expository passages are just explaining various things, right? So like, take a look here. This one is from chemistry textbook, right? And it just tells you the 3 states of matter. This one is how art relates to sports. Again, this is just exposition of information. And they both come from, like, you could see that expository passages, you read them a lot in your freshman and your sophomore level classes, right? When you're taking intro classes to your major, you're only getting exposition of information that everybody knows that is assumed as background knowledge is a higher level, right? So there's no arguments there. Illustrations. An illustration is basically an explanation. No, it's not an explanation. That's the wrong word. It's an example, right? Using words to convey information using an example. And oftentimes we can imagine that the illustrations with words could come with like pictures that would convey the same level of information, right? So here our book defines it as an expression involving one or more examples that's intended to show what something means or how it's done, right? So an illustration, you could watch YouTube videos illustrating how to make risotto, for instance, right? Or you can watch an illustration of how to eat crawfish, which I actually did once and probably will never do again. I know. You can't really take the Yankee out of me, even though I live here full time. All right. So illustrations, chemical elements as well as compounds can be represented by molecular formulas. Thus, oxygen is represented by O2, water by H2O, right? H2O, and sodium chloride by NaCl, right? That tells you, and of course you can imagine the big bulbous kind of things in your chemistry textbook that tell you about molecular formulas. Again, illustration, right? Now, there is something called arguments from example, and this is a deviation from the rule. This is actually an argument using an example, all right? So let's take a look, because this actually has at least one statement must claim to present evidence or reasons, and then there is a supported claim here, right? So, although most forms of cancer, if untreated, can cause death, not all cancers are life-threatening. Now, the conclusion here is not all cancers are life-threatening. For example, basal cell carcinoma, the most common of all skin cancers, can produce disfigurement, but it almost never results in death, right? So you see the example given is intended to prove not all cancers are life-threatening, because that's our conclusion, and the passage is interpreted best as an argument because it contains at least one statement that presents evidence for thinking the conclusion not all cancers are life-threatening. All right, and in fact, there are some forms of cancer that are better to get than others. Like pancreatic cancer is always a death sentence in terms of, and the thing is, when you discover that you have pancreatic cancer, it's usually too late, and you can't just cut away at the pancreas and have people live. That's why it's so life-threatening. Remember when I was talking about the exception with because? So there is a little bit of vocabulary here, and I'm going to stop and give a little bit of explanation here. So let me, I'm just going to clean off my board while you stare at the screen. There's probably going to be a time where I forgot I actually kept the screen on, and hopefully I don't do that when I make these videos for the online class, right? But let's take a look here, and let me write these things out for you and turn off the. All right, I'm going to stop the share screen. All right. So, explanation. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at both the infographic, but the difference. Explanation, right? Explanation is not the same as argument. In fact, we use argumentation to prove controversial things that are not settled knowledge, right? So for instance, the explanation, the sky appears blue from the Earth's surface because light rays from the sun are scattered by particles in the atmosphere. That's no longer unsettling. We've already had arguments in the past that have settled that. That's considered, and the blending of that scattering pattern is blue. And then the scattering effect closer to sunset and sunrise create purple, pinks, oranges, reds, etc. Right? That's why you get the differentiation for sunsets. Maybe that's why we consider sunsets so beautiful, is we only catch glimpses of them with the scattering effect. All right. So an explanation is an expression that sheds light on some event or phenomena, but that sheds light usually causal. Right? We don't no longer have to explain the causal knowledge as to why it is the case that the sky is blue. So every explanation is composed of two components, right? The explanandum and the explanans. Let's write these out. One, the explanandum. I know these Latin expressions, and then the explanans. These words might repeat in some sort of science classes. That's also why I kind of stopped. One of the things about Hurley is we get some information along the way. And section 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 are all packed with deviations from the main because there's so much there, right? So the explanandum is the statement that describes the event or phenomena to be explained. All right, so let me repeat that. The explanandum describes the event. Describes the event or phenomenon in question. Right, and phenomenon is singular, phenomenon is plural. Explanans is the statement or group of statements that convey that explanation. All right, so statements or group of statements, right, that do the explaining. So let's take a look at the example in the book, right? The sky appears blue from the Earth's surface, right? So the sky appears blue. The sky appears blue. That's just a description of what needs explained. So the explanandum is the object of explanation. And then why? Right? Well, the light rays are scattered by atmospheric particles. There's obviously a more detailed explanation, but I'm not a scientist, right? But number two is the explanans. Okay. So you might actually encounter, and also let's take a look at the infographic inside the textbook now to sort of ground in this distinction between, right? Let me go back to the book. So take a look here at this infographic, right? An argument takes accepted facts and then says that those facts support a conclusion. But then pay attention on the flip side of an explanation. An explanation never goes beyond the accepted facts, right? So the explanans are those statements that explain the object of explanation. But notice we don't go beyond. The main difference between argument and explanation is that we don't go beyond accepted facts, right? So if you were only giving explanations and then you encounter something that you can't explain, right? You'll start doing some scientific reasoning, you'll start doing experiments, and eventually you're going to interpret the scientific model that might be contested amongst area experts. Like, what is the, are there neutrons and protons? Think back when we were just postulating the existence of these particles of physics, right? So now some existence of some particles is accepted fact, and in another time it was considered controversial. So most explanations have been argued for in the past. It's just some things are accepted fact, right? And the things that are accepted fact are the things that our general encyclopedic knowledge, right? And that is the difference between argument and explanation. Okay, so there's some stuff to talk about with conditional statements. A conditional statement is an if-then statement, right? And let me go here. The rule of, so I'm going to stop sharing. So as far as a non-inferential passage, right? A non-inferential passage would be a conclusion on its own. Now, there are pieces of reasoning and arguments that actually use conditional statements. But no matter how many times I say this, there's always someone who misses this on an exam. So I'm going to say it and write this down, right? Get out a sheet of paper, write this down, pause, do whatever, right? But an if-then statement by itself is never an argument. An if-then statement with other if-then statements can be an argument, or an if-then statement with another statement can be an argument. But on its own, an if-then statement is never an argument, right? But they're used a lot in different argumentative forms. So, introducing if-then statements is not a bad idea right now. So an if-then statement logically has certain parts to it. So if Dr. H is in Baton Rouge, then Dr. H is in Louisiana, right? The original LA, I know there's got to be someone from California in the class, right? So, haha, we're the original LA. Anyway, sorry. So Dr. H is in Baton Rouge, then Dr. H is in Louisiana. This on its own is not an argument, right? So this is NA, not an argument, or I'll do NI, non-inferential passage, not N, right? That is the rule. We call this part the antecedent, right? Something that antecedes another thing comes before it, right? So antecedent literally comes before, and then the part that comes after the then is called the consequent. So this on its own is not an argument. Now I can actually display for you an if-then statement used appropriately inside an argument. So that's what I'm going to do now, right? I'm just going to get rid of that. If-then statements are not arguments on their own. How about I write that down as a if-then, what we call conditional statements, on their own do not equal argument, right? So that equal sign with the slash through it means does not equal to, right? So conditional statements on their own are not arguments. So P1, if Dr. H is in Baton Rouge, then Dr. H is in Louisiana. Okay, let's join it with something else. If Dr. H is in Louisiana, then Dr. H is in the United States of America, right? Now, because premise 2 is a conditional statement like premise 1, but you'll notice that this antecedent is the same as the consequent in premise 1, then what we can do is, can you guess? We can conclude another conditional statement, right? Here and here. So we can make an inference because this is the bridge. We can get another on a separate line. And this is sometimes called chain argument or the true hypothetical syllogism, right? If Dr. H is in Baton Rouge, then necessarily you can conclude that then Dr. H is in the United States of America. And this is an appropriate deductive argument using a conditional statement. But on its own, conditional statement is never an argument. Okay. Let me state that as how the book states it, right? So there's three things. A single conditional statement is not an argument. A conditional statement may serve as either the premise or conclusion or both of an argument, as in the case of here, right? And the inferential content of a conditional statement may be re-expressed to form an argument, right? But that restatement would mean that it would be working with other things. So again, on its own, a conditional statement is not an argument. I've probably said that about 4 or 5 times. There will always be someone that is not listening or watching or reading very well, if reading at all, right? And they will miss that question on my exam. So you have to worry. Okay, so that is basically the entire unit, right? I will be doing another video shortly on how to put this all together, right? The homework is basically taking a bunch of these passages, right, and deciding about whether or not there is an argument there or not. So you have to write argument if it does have an argument. And remember, arguments have premises that support claims, right? Statements that are conclusions that imply or supported by evidence. So those two things have to be there. Otherwise, you might have something from this list. And of course, as you may imagine, what Hurley does is he has this list of simple non-argumentative passages, and you basically have to say non-argument and then identify which one it is, right? So not only do you have to say argument versus non-argument, but if it's not an argument, then you have to go to the list and decide what those things are. So we'll review those homework problems from 1.2 separately in a separate video. Again, thank you for attending, and remember, keep thinking logically.